All right, traders, welcome to today's end of day market recap. This is Christian Primertz, Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Thursday, the 22nd. One more trading day to go before we get to Memorial Day weekend. Perhaps things slow down a little bit. They usually do. I don't know why we don't have half days on the week before a 3-day weekend like Memorial Day weekend. It makes sense to do so because it will be very quiet, I would imagine, tomorrow afternoon. But well, we'll see. I will most likely be here for the duration. Let's uh, let's see how it goes for tomorrow. So that said, risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only, not giving anybody useful recommendations. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only. So I think there are some good today, some good stories, and also some bad stories, and or some stories that were not great. And I think it's the same thing when you look at earnings after the close today. You've got some things that are acting pretty well into it. Just going to refresh this here for a second. Let's go with the positive first. Into it up about 8.8%. Autodesk up. Also see Toast is up after the close. CoreWeave is up a little bit. And then on the downside, more so I'm referring to the names that reported earnings. You got Decker's down 13%, Ross Stores down almost 9%, Workday down 5%, and Webull is also down about 5%. Looks like Snowflake has given back some of the day's gains as well. So, there's some negative things and there's some positive things. And that's kind of how today was. You had a nice little bounce today, but we kind of really gave up ground and had a poor close at the end. So I'm going to start with the topic that everybody was talking about yesterday and probably still talking about today. And, there's always a wall of worry with the market. There's always things that you have to worry about. And from time to time, it can be the bond market. And I talked a lot about that and, how a higher rate is not particularly good. So, we did try to climb back here today, and bonds did finish positive. It looked like pre-market bonds were going lower again. Rates were going higher, but some buyers stepped in, and we're still kind of hovering around the support. We did violate that. We don't know if that's, we're hanging on to this support down here. Reminder, by the way, again, there's so much focus on sometimes the small picture. If you go back to where we were at the end of 2023, look at how much further TLT was down than it is now. Remember, we're talking about bond prices here, and you have to have a little bit of an understanding of how a bond works. When bond prices go down, that means rates go higher. That's just how a bond works, right? And if you've taken any type of financial classes in college, you probably have gone over that. So yields go up when bond prices go down. That means yields are going higher. So we're looking at it, and TLT always is looking at bond prices and not the yield. You could flip it around and you can look at, we could look at that, but basically it's the same like technical analysis. So I get it. Like 5% is a big deal, and you might see the small caps really underperform if bond prices continue to move lower past this. Tech stocks, on the other hand, names, and again, like this is the playbook that I've talked about, over the years. But when yields go higher like this, who doesn't really suffer because of this? Directly anyway, maybe indirectly because of their customers might be more in a pinch. But names like Apple who have refinanced their debt, right, and have a lot of cash on hand, they don't really have to worry too much about yields going higher. Directly, indirectly, like I said, maybe their customers might be feeling more of a pinch and buy less products because the financing is more expensive. And if they have debt, if they have credit card debt, they're going to be paying, it's going to eat away at their spending. That's the concern. So for now, bonds rallied a bit today, up a 0.5%. Let's move over to equities, and that's I'm going to move away from the bond conversation. Trust me, I don't like to start these videos talking about bonds. I find that it's more of a boring type video when I'm talking about bonds, and they are a little bit more of a boring subject here. So what do we know here about the S&P? We know that we broke below the 5-period moving average. To me, again, and this is short term, like I have to preface this because everybody has different time frames. I trade, I'm in front of the screens all day long, and for the most part. But I will always talk a little bit more about the short term because I trade. I'm in front of the screens every single day. So, like I said, for the for the most part. So that affects, if I was only looking at my portfolio or trading, and it would be um once a week, or just looking at what was going on in the market a couple times a week, then I would be talking a little bit longer term. But since I'm of the time frame that I just mentioned, I do pay attention to if price is below the 5 period moving average. It just tells me if the bulls are in charge in the short term, or if they've started to kind of lose out here and we're in a little bit of distribution. We're in a little bit of distribution. Is this the end of the world that we're now in digestion mode a little bit? No, it's not, because markets go up and they go down, right? And what I would be watching for is either for us to retake that 5 period moving average, which would show strength, or maybe we come down to this 20 day, which is kind of caught up now with the 200-day moving average. Remember, we had a very fast aggressive move here. So, or the 200-day moving average, that could be a good place for things to reset a little bit. All right, so that's just where we are. Also, I like to look at these 1 hour charts because, again, sometimes you can get these clues from the short-term time frame, but we're really doing a hell of a lot of consolidation around the bottom of the value area for the week. Why does that occur so much? Well, because this value area for the week is based on all of the volume from last week. And you could see the volume profile from last week, right, which is all of this, right? And it becomes, once you put roughly a standard deviation around this, right, you could see that it becomes very significant. Hence, we try to break back out of this towards the middle of the day yesterday before that bond auction. Couldn't do it. And we're doing a whole bunch of, so it's almost like the market is starting to lean lower. There's still some buyers that are hanging around and pushing it up, but you're starting to see possibly, and we don't know yet because we're right at the bottom of the value area, but certainly there was some sellers that kind of came in and moved the market back down, right back into this 538.15 level. So that becomes significant. Also, this 200-period moving average, I tend to watch this too. Again, everything I have on my charts is for a particular reason, because this 200-period moving average could really kind of mark the shorter, it helps with the shorter term trend. Notice that all the way back, I think this is the end of the middle towards the end of April, is that when we reclaim this, we've been above this since then. So for now, the trend is the short-term trend on the 1 hour chart is still kind of still in favor of the bulls. But if we start to break this, then you know that the trend is kind of in jeopardy, right? And here's what's happened. Again, all these things kind of just help to see things, to help to see, like, who's basically in control right now, and whether there's more distribution, or whether there's also or whether there's more accumulation on the tape. Here's the cues, right? And not this is kind of how this has been for a while, but the cues are not much different than the S&P because this is also below the 5 period moving average, right? Here was the rejection yesterday where we were above. We opened below the 5 period moving average. We try to basically rally, and we ran out of steam. And again, it could be that we're in consolidation for a bit. Here's also the value area for the week. Now there's a little bit more bumper room here, but again, you could see what I'm talking about in terms of significance. Earlier this week, we got to the top of the value area and we didn't have enough power, strength to get through. We tried it again yesterday. It was another failure. Notice as well, we tagged the bottom of the value area. We bounced from it. We tagged it again this morning. We bounced from it. But, maybe we come back down here to 511 because that was the support. And again, this is just the value area for the week, right? It's based on all of last week's activity, and we're still in that range for now. So there's still some indecision. What has me a little bit concerned is that when we look at IWM, this looks different, right? This is broken that value area earlier in the week, and has been moving down. So also note that 200 period moving average that I talked about on the SPY chart, right? And how that we've been above that for a while. Same thing with IWM, but we're now below it. So there's some changing that's happening here. There's some more weakness in small caps. Again, part of that may have to do with rising yields, but you could also check this out. All right, when we look at the NYSE and the NASI, I'm just going to show the NYSE here really quickly because it looks similar to the NASI, but you're starting to see, I've got a 10-day moving average with this, but you're starting to see like it's kind of very similar to what I've been kind of saying with IWM showing some relative weakness. You're just seeing breadth start to take a move lower, where you're not seeing as many things advancing as you are or as you were doing since the end of April, right? So you're starting to see breadth weaken a little bit. So again, that means more things are going down versus going up, right? So it just means a little bit more difficult of a market, and that's the night. That's this. So the price leaning down as well as the breadth not doing so well. They're kind of confirming one another right now. Also, this comes from my midday note, which again you could sign up at ttgtrading.substack.com. Especially, I would encourage you to sign up for the paid version, which is only $19.99 a month. It's not much, folks. This is the 4-week new highs versus new lows. So this is also showing us something a little bit has changed. This is the first time that new lows in the pink are greater than the new highs. Yeah, so this is 1 month stuff for the S&P for about a month, going all the way back to 421, just about a month. So again, all these things are telling you that we're kind of weak. That not only has the price action gone below the 5-day moving average, but we're also seeing weakness under the hood too with some of the components. All right. So does that mean that there's no setups right now? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But in my trading and in my risk management, uh, you know, there's adjustments to be made, right? It's one of the hardest things I think for some traders to do is to make adjustments, right? Change around. Some traders want to come in, and I get this. I want to do the same thing every day too, but basically it's making adjustments. And when the breadth is not as strong, right? When the price action is not as strong, right? I'm not going to carry as many swing trades. I'm a swing trader. So if you're a day trader, it probably doesn't matter that much. But if you're carrying positions as I am as a day trader, it's meaningful to go over all this and to make adjustments as the market changes, right? We don't want to just do the same thing and be stubborn every day. And I'm going to say, oh, I'm only going to trade how I want to trade no matter what. That usually doesn't end very well. It usually works very well in bull markets, in a raging bull market. But when things slow down a little bit, you should, in my opinion, also be making some adjustments if that's what your time frame is as well. So let's go back to this. What did very well today? And I can't believe I'm so far into this video and I haven't talked about the quantum stocks. I mean, you just normally don't see moves like that. And that's what makes this market like why I wouldn't say like, oh, geez, this market, that's it. There's no trading setups, there's nothing to do in this market. That's not the case. You had IONQ up at 1.40% for the day. 40%. And you could have, I think this was the best one out of the group. They were on what spurred this. I'm assuming this is what spurred this, is that the CEO told Barron's that they want to be the NVIDIA of the quantum space. And that just set the whole group ablaze. Why did it set the rest of the group ablaze? I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me. It matters where price is going. There was a heck of a lot of option flow in things like RGTI, QBTS. So this was a monster move on monster volume today. Took out this VPOC. I thought we would kind of stop there, or at least maybe close around this level, but not so much. RGTI, I did trade this one today. And by the way, like I feature this. Speaking of the weekend note that not weekend note, the midday note that I put out. I put this group on Friday, and I said, hey, I think that this group is really kind of shaping up. I think I put a couple setups in there, but RGTI, no slouch, up 26%. And again, just a boatload of option activity in this thing. Good volume on this. So I did take some profits in a trade that I put on earlier today, but I'm going to sit and see if this thing has continuation. QBTS is the one that has been really strong, up 24% today. That breaks out to new highs. Very impressive. And our watch list, I covered these. I actually had QBTS on for the last couple weeks. You can see this is how, I send this watch list out Sunday night, usually to members. I include a chart setup, and that goes into our charts channel, every day. So, sorry, not every day, but every day I do post chart setups where I see them. But this is what I do during the day, right? Is basically give ideas, talk about where we're seeing option activity. But I put the setup for every one of these names. I also put the trigger in there. I try to mention where the trigger is coming from in most of the setups. It's tough to do it all, but I had QBTS on here. That's up 35% from the trigger. I also had IONQ on here as well. And today I added the RGTI. I also added yesterday. It was funny. QUBT. Somebody was giving me a hard time. They're like, geez, you really like the quantum names. No, I mean they just all set up. And that's the case. If I see names setting up in a group, and if a group is showing relative strength, you're going to bet that I'm going to try to have them out for members and the setup, so that they can take a look at it and decide if that setup works for them. So again, just amazing the strength. I would say, and finally just this other one, I would keep an eye on this one. This one had strong earnings. That's like the fourth inside day in a row for QUBT, right? All the price action being contained in that earnings, but I think this has a good chance to get to the top of the value area, which is call it 1450. I know I've covered this one in some of the end of day videos as well. So that was the big story today. There is, by the way, like some of these, like I view these groups, the names that I mentioned, high momentum. They could really move quickly. There is an ETF in the quantum space, but it's a little bit diluted in terms of there's a lot of names in this quantum ETF, some of which you probably wouldn't even think are quantum names at all. So, you always have to remember that. Again, this is another thing where I try to do a little bit of learning in these videos, because I see mistakes always happen by you know, traders that come in and they're like, "Hey, what's the ETF for this group?" And I give them the symbol, and they're off and running with it. And they never look, I don't say never, but a lot of times they don't look to see what's in the ETF, because just because the ETF has a name, says, "Oh, quantum ETF," that must represent all these names very well. It's not that. It's more diluted. So D-Wave QBTS is the top weight. Okay, great. That's 6.5% of the ETF. RGTI is in here too, but it's only 2% of the ETF. Really, these things should be like each of them should be at least over 10% of the ETF. And we know these things can get top heavy, right? For example, like if you look at the XLK ETF, you know that they're top heavy, right? So for example, Microsoft is 14% of this ETF. NVIDIA is 13%. Apple's 12%, right? Google and Meta aren't in here. They're in the XLC ETF. They're in the communications ETF. But I think you probably are understanding what I'm saying. Given that these names are the big names in the space, why are they not bigger? So that's my complaint. And I think you just want to realize that. So if you're looking to extract the same performance out of, like, if you average what those four names that I mentioned, the IONQ, the QBTS, the QUBT, and the Rigetti RGTI, and you notice that they were all up about 20%, and you're saying, geez, well, this quantum ETF wasn't up that much. Well, that's because they've got CLAC in here. They've got RTX in here, right? They've got an IONQ is in here, but it's only 1% of the ETF. So again, not very good, guys. Intel is even in here. Intel, a quantum, I mean, analog devices, which fell decently today. is in here. So again, I hope somebody creates a better ETF. If you're listening out there, I hope somebody creates a better quantum ETF. This isn't great. Airbus is in here too. Okay. Regardless, I think the chart still looks pretty good. I actually bought a little bit of this, even though it's not a pure play on those top names. But I think this looks pretty good. And we only have one more day of the week, so you could kind of look at the weekly chart too. But it's trying to break higher. So I don't have anything against those names. Like I like some of those names that I mentioned. They just don't belong in quantum. You could probably make the case too why some of those names I mentioned probably don't belong in the quantum ETF. Airbus, for example. Okay, so moving on. And again, I think it's important to spend the most amount of time on this because that was pretty good. Cyber names acted really well. Retail acted well today too. Here's cyber. Sorry, wrong symbol. User error. Right back at this is again the weekly chart. Right back at those highs. It shook off the Palo Alto earnings report, and a couple of names looked pretty good in here. CrowdStrike is very close. Is so close to taking that next leg higher. Nice bounce on the 20-day moving average. For now, you could try to be patient. We know that the earnings is coming up in this. I believe it's the beginning of June when this reports. But, sometimes these names will make the moves before they report earnings. That's what I would be watching here. And I think as long as you have patience, it's doing okay. It's just hanging out. And I would watch the 20-day moving average. And then the name that's really been impressive is RBRK, which has been breaking out to new highs. Just, very nice methodical move there. All right. One other group I was going to mention today too, so noticing what Bitcoin did today, which continuation, Bitcoin was very nice. It rallied at the end of the day. But I'll tell you what's very interesting to me is that the crypto names did not do very well today. This blockchain ETF was down 4.5% today. Now, again, it had a huge spike yesterday, and today's just an inside day. So you can't really, on an inside day, it doesn't mean no change in trend. But some of these names just, I don't know, look at MSTR. Now, again, it's still holding that 20-day moving average like I just talked about in CrowdStrike, but man, you would think that this would be doing a lot better with Bitcoin going up. So reminder, this is not just a leveraged play on Bitcoin, right? They are levered Bitcoin, but that's not how they function. It's a company, right? It's not a levered ETF, for example. So in any event, I find this interesting. I'll continue to watch this one. It would be very notable, I think, if this breaks down and Bitcoin is still around the highs. Tells you something might not be right inside the company. So just conclusion for the video is that with the indices below their 5-day moving average, not end of this, not a horrible thing right now. You just have to be patient and know that for now, it looks like the market has kind of just lost some upside momentum, and we might be in consolidation station for a bit. And you want to make some adjustments. The adjustments that I've made as the market has lost upside momentum is basically just try to be a little bit choosy and pickier with the setups and taking trades. I reduced some risk yesterday, and I'm probably going to stay that way for a little bit. I'm not going to go back to holding, probably 8 to 10 positions. Probably more so, for now, 4 to 7, depending on what's going on. Like if I see setups like I did like in the quantum names, I'm going to participate in those, like I did in RGTI. So, but it's going to be more dialed down in terms of risk exposure, provided that the indices are below their 5-day moving average. Guys, have a great night. See you tomorrow. Probably won't be a video at the end of the day tomorrow, so just keep that in mind. Have a great night, everybody.